Okay, here we're looking at the Year 12 Higher Level Paper 2, Question 2. The diagram shows some of the metabolic processes taking place in a plant cell. So this should immediately alert us to the fact that we will probably find somewhere on this diagram photosynthesis. A brief look at the diagram, we can see carbon dioxide and water combining, polysaccharides from monosaccharides, and the breakdown of ATP. So let's take a look at the stem of the question. It says identify both the process and state the name of the organelle where it takes place. So process Y, which you can see here. So in process Y, we begin with carbon dioxide, and if we track this arrow round, we see it ends here in the monosaccharides. So if you want to make carbon dioxide into a monosaccharide, this indeed, of course, is photosynthesis, and the location of that particular event is the chloroplast. So photosynthesis and the chloroplast will be the answers to our first question. Let's just move down a little bit to have a look at. So here, photosynthesis and chloroplast. As we previously stated, let's take a look at the next section of the question. It's asking us to identify molecule Z. So let's just go back up. Apologies for the scrolling, but it's necessary. So Z is here, and it's pointing at lipids. The arrow here is to fatty acids. So we got fatty acids to lipid, and what do we need in order to add to fatty acids to create lipid? And you'll know that that's glycerol, or you could write glycerin. So that's molecule Z. This is glycerol here. So we need to write that into our answer, glycerol. 3-carbon compound, glycerol. State the type of reaction which converts excess monosaccharides into polysaccharides, which is shown in the diagram. If we take a quick glimpse, so our monosaccharides are here, and we're creating polysaccharides. What do we call this? So any monosaccharide turned into a polysaccharide is polymerization. So that would work. It's asking you for the type of reaction. So if you recall, this would be a condensation reaction. So that would be an acceptable alternative. You only need one of these, so that one or this one. Now, also turning small molecules into larger molecules is an example of anabolism, or anabolic is another way to say that. So either of these is fine as an answer to this particular question. We're now being asked to identify the process X that uses oxygen and produces ATP. Let's take a look at this in the diagram. I'll have to scroll for that. And so notice that process X is here. It's using up the oxygen. It's also using up monosaccharides. So we know that this process of making ATP using oxygen and the sugars is, of course, what we would call respiration. And of course, it's actually aerobic respiration. So let's write that. So that's aerobic respiration for completeness. Part D then says outline, which means to give a brief summary of the uses of ATP in plant cells. So what's ATP for? So we know that ATP is required for any active process, but you may not have used that phrase. You might have said something like needs energy, any process that needs energy. And then the next part would be for you to suggest which particular processes in plants needs energy. So photosynthesis requires ATP. You'll remember it's produced in the light dependent reaction. Processes of growth require ATP. Sensitivity also requires ATP, so growth in response to a stimulus. All of these processes, reproduction requires ATP. These are all active processes requiring energy. So two parts there. One to say this particular section here, needing energy, active processes, and then to give an example of how that might be. And then it says, with reference to the diagram, identify one example of catabolism. So if I briefly scroll back just to finish this question, we look at the diagram. So catabolism is when things are broken down. And we've already discussed one of those, which is the breakdown of the monosaccharides into ATP in order to generate ATP, so that could be respiration. So that's going to be a pretty good example of a catabolic reaction. But a second one is to be aware that in photosynthesis we have the process of photolysis, breaking down the water to provide a source of hydrogen ions. So we would need to put either of those two. My personal preference would be to put respiration, but it is technically perfectly acceptable and correct to put photolysis. If you stated photosynthesis, it would be necessary for you to then specify the photolytic event, the breakdown of the water to provide a source of protons and electrons, and the byproduct of oxygen. This is the end of the question. 7 marks for this one.